Okay, I believe I think we're good to go. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, just a minute. I'm sorry. I just dropped my agenda. Just a minute. There we go. Okay. The Manchester Community School Board of Trustees opens our regular meeting. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to call the meeting to order with the Pledge of Allegiance. There's a flag behind Dr. Grimeau. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And then the roll call, I think to the official, I just look at your name and you'll say if you're present. So the Turflinger.
Dave?
Somebody talking to me?
Yes.
We're just doing a roll call.
Okay, yeah, I'm
So,
here.
Verbal, yeah. Mr. Esposito,
Present.
Mr. Hensley,
Here.
Mr. Shaw,
Present.
and Mr. Bedke.
Present.
So we are, Mr. Flack is absent today. Emergency additions and deletions. There's the deletion of policy 2150. Are there any other additions or deletions to the agenda?
There are not.
Okay. A hearing of the patrons, Mr. Self, I think, is going to explain how this will work.
Yes, thank you. We have it set up that we can bring patrons in. We would invite them into the Zoom call. If they want to email me at my email, it's randy_self@mcs.k12.in.us. You can email me. Also, if you got problems with that or you want to call me, I can give you directions. My direct line into my office here is 260-306-3360. So if you get a hold of me with either one of those, at the end of the meeting, when it's time, I will bring you into the Zoom call. You'll go into a waiting room, and when the board is ready, we'll bring you into the call on video and audio. And then after you make your comments, then you can leave the meeting. So that's the way that will work. So if I get any emails or phone calls, I'll take care of that. Any questions from the board on that?
No.
Okay,
Thanks for doing that, Mr. Self.
sure.
All right, then we're at the consent items portion of the agenda. Typically, we read the grants and donations aloud. So the grants, there's a temporary assistance to retain childcare from Early Learning Indiana for $5,670. EPA Diesel Emission and Reduction Act, School Board Bus Rebates, $20,000. Project Lead the Way to MIS for Project Lead the Way training costs, $700. Career Ladders Planning Grant for $79,102.50. And there's been a donation of $100 to MCS for negative lunch balances from an anonymous donor. So I'm looking for a motion to approve consent items.
So moved.
I'll move. I'll second.
Okay, so there was a second by Mr. Bedke, and I'm not quite sure or there was a motion by Mr. Bedke, and I don't know who seconded. I'm sorry.
I did, Ruth.
Mr. Hensley? Okay.
Yeah.
And a second from Mr. Hensley. All those in favor, remember this is we have to do it out loud, a verbal vote. So Mr. Turflinger?
exactly what are we going to use the $79,000 for? I mean,
I'm trying to remember it. Oh, career ladders, planning grant. We're working on trying to do a study with our business department. They're changing a lot from pathways. And we're trying to beef up our business department, and we're going to use most of that money for professional development and trying to train our teachers and get our business program going a little bit better.
so it's for teacher training then, leading into pathways?
Yes, mainly.
Okay, I vote yes.
I'm sorry, I forgot to add. Is there any other discussion? All right.
No, I
Mr.
just like what I just heard though, so.
Good.
Mr. Hensley, what's your vote?
Yes.
Mr. Esposito,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
and Mr. Bedke?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. So motion carries 6-0. Thank you. Recommendations for approval. We have 3 policies. Do we do these as each separate recommendations, or can we group them together?
Typically you do them individually.
Okay, no problem. So the first recommendation for approval is policy 5240, test security assessment. This is the second reading.
I'll make a motion for
Is there
approval.
Thank you. A motion from Mr. Hensley. Do we have a second? And a second from Mr. Esposito. Is there any discussion? Then I'll do a roll call for your vote. Mr. Turflinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hensley,
Yes.
Mr. Esposito,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Bedke.
Yes.
I also vote yes, so the motion carries 6-0. Thank you. We're looking for a recommendation for approval of policy 2050, public records, designee and copy fees. This is again a second reading.
I'll move.
Can we have a bit of a discussion on this? I know it's late in the game, but what would the board think about if it's a document less than a year old that would, for lack of a better word, be at the office staff's fingertips, allowing Manchester Community Schools residents, not talking about businesses that want to know. I think Teresa mentioned something about a bread report. But if a citizen in our community needs a document that's less than a year old, what would we think about having a waiver of the fees in there for that?
Why?
Well, I think they pay enough taxes. I mean, we're going to charge them $30 an hour to go look for a document that's less than a year old. I mean, if a kid needs something for a FAFSA, a student needs something for a FAFSA, or a parent needs a document for the court, maybe it's a custody thing, maybe they need an attendance record. You know, I don't have a problem with the fee for the actual document, but the $30 an hour research fee, if it's something that's at our fingertips that's less than a year old, why are we charging our parents? Now, like I said, if it's a business, somebody, Teresa mentioned in the first reading, she mentioned like a company was asking for our bread records. Can you expand on that, Teresa?
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of different documents that are requested. A lot of them are financial. Some of them are what our bids are, what bids were awarded. I've had lots of different things over the years, but if you're talking about a student record, those are typically from the school. There isn't a charge for those if they come back and they wanted something I'm
Dave,
just
in
trying,
in
I
this,
don't have the document in front of me, so I'm trying to figure out, remember how it was worded.
yeah, it says it's only if it's in excess of 5 hours that you get the.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I knew there was some disclaimer in there.
So most of the time, if it's at our fingertips, it's certainly not going to take us 5 hours to, so the $30 fee wouldn't be in there.
So what we discussed in committee was just that the variation in the request could be so great. And then part of that was to just deter frivolous, there may be legitimate, but also just frivolous requests for information, some type of cost in there. But as we talked about that, I think the common sense part works in here, who's requesting what at the school, as far as cost and stuff like that. So that's, in that discussion we had, there's such a variation in the request. There's something in there to at least recover cost if there's some type of, frivolous or very detailed request for information. So.
Yes.
Hey, Raju, what paragraph is the 5 hour? Sorry, I'm just cruising through it. Where does it say that?
It's the,
It's the 1, 2, 3, 4,
Alright.
fifth paragraph.
fifth paragraph.
I got you. Thank you. So I'll move to approve as is. I appreciate the question though, Mr. Turflinger.
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion from Mr. Esposito and a second by Mr. Bedke. Is there any more discussion?
Only in the fact that I'm glad that came up so people don't think we're trying to deter information. So good question, Dave.
Mr. Turflinger, did you have anything else that you wanted to discuss? or
No, I
you
just asked the
satisfied?
question if we wanted to do that.
Okay. It's just so hard through the Zoom meeting to know if people are thinking or need more time. So let's go ahead and do a roll call for our vote. Mr. Turflinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hensley,
Yes.
Mr. Esposito,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Bedke.
Yes.
I would also vote yes, so the motion carries 6-0. Thank you. We also have a recommendation of approval for policy 3150, alcohol and controlled substance testing policy for commercial drivers, CDL employees. This is a second reading. Is there a motion for approval?
I'll move approved.
Second.
There's a motion from Mr. Bedke and a second from Mr. Esposito. Is there any discussion? All right, then I'll do a roll call for the vote. Mr. Turflinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hensley,
Yes.
Mr. Esposito,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Bedke.
Yes.
I also vote yes, so the motion carries 6-0. Thanks, guys. Thank you. Recommendation for approval is the spring ECA stipends.
I would move that we, any payments that have been made, that we let those stand, but discontinue those payments for these spring sports going forward.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear him.
I couldn't either.
Sorry, can you hear me?
I can now.
Okay, yes, I would make a motion that we let any payments that have already been made stand and suspend the payments going forward for those spring ECA stipends?
Can somebody direct me? Are we looking at a policy or discussion? Tell me, sorry.
It's under miscellaneous.
Okay,
We're talking about paying the coaches for spring.
right, miscellaneous.
Well, it's not just coaches. I mean, we're
Well-
talking, anybody does like any academic bowls or plays, the musical was coming up, those kind of things. So it's not just
Yeah,
coaches.
The bulk of it is spring coaches in the spring, because most everyone else was done with their stuff coming off of the winter. Like except the play, they were a week out and they would have had it, so they had pretty much earned everything that they were going to get. So it does pretty much impact the spring sports at this point, because some of them weren't able to begin officially with their seasons, and some were in a few weeks with practice. The one thing that's a little bit different this year than what's been in the previous years is when the IHSAA opened up the ability to practice with your team and individuals in the fall and in the winter. Compared to what you used to be able to do, you weren't able to do that. And this year they were able to do that in the fall and winter and run them through drills and conditioning. And you could even go out on your field and practice and do those things at those select times. So coaches did do those things. They just weren't able to get to their part of the spring. Bad luck, I guess, or poor timing with all of this, I know. So again, we just reached out to some area schools. They were indicating they were going to pay theirs. MTA obviously supports this. And so that was just our recommendation at this time, because some of those coaches that are teachers, that's part of their pay, their weekly pays throughout the year. If you're a lay coach and not a teacher, then you're paid twice over your season. And so there's some differences there, and those are things we're looking to clean up for next year and not have that deducted from their paychecks if they're teachers, and do it as a 1 or 2 pay stipend during their season, so that, if something does occur like this, we're able to manage that a little bit better.
So Jeremy, that was going to be my question. So take any of them that may be a full-time employee at the school,
Yes,
and they're a head coach or an assistant coach, it doesn't matter.
right.
I'm sure most people have their pay, distributed over 12 months. Does that include the coaching stipend too?
Yes, it does.
So Coach Castle knows that she's the head track coach in August, even though it's a spring sport, she gets paid over the course of the whole year for that.
Correct. Over the course of her 26 paychecks
Yeah.
that she would get. Yeah. So it's broken down. And we've had this discussion and actually talked about it before this all hit, actually, about looking at changing that to where we would just pay that as a 1-time or a 2-time payment during their season, because, maybe you intend to coach in August and you're a spring coach, but something changes in your life and you're not able to do that and you have to resign that position. Well, you've already been paid out August through whenever you may decide you can't do that spring sport. And then sometimes you're trying to get money back and recoup that. And that part of it isn't always fun to do and makes it tougher, obviously, on the payroll side of things. So that's why moving forward, starting with next school year, it would be our recommendation that we would change that process to where they just get a 1-time payment, or twice during their season, like we do with our lay coaches right now. One at the beginning of the season and one at the end.
So some of these folks, if we chose not to approve this, they would have to actually pay you back then.
Correct.
When does the year end?
It would go through July or end of June.
Fiscal year, right?
Yeah.
So this $45,000, then probably 38's already been distributed.
Yeah. I mean, we'd have to go back and look through all those, but a good amount of our coaches in the spring, our teachers are on our staff, so they've received the majority of that pay at this point. And this money was budgeted. It wasn't, and it comes out of the education fund. So just FYI there, if you weren't sure where it came from, it is pre-budgeted in.
So it's 0.3% of a percentage of our budget. The people were contracted, which to most people, when you contract somebody, that means something as far as loyalty, even though this coronavirus hit. We've set sort of a precedent paying other people, you know, and I think if you have a plan going forward, you know, my point to this would be, you know, it's hard enough being a coach. So, you know, in a way, if I were a coach in this position and we didn't pay him, that would be a little bit of disloyalty to me, is what I'm thinking. And then my last thought on this is, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty in budget. And so what I'd like to see is different options, you know, as we go forward, because we just don't know, you know. So, you know, this is at this point, what would you say the priority from a 1 to 10 is to not paying coaches as far as our budget going forward? Does anybody have any idea? And is it worth it? So that's my take on it.
I can see where if a coach has to leave mid-year for whatever reason, the way we're paying it makes it difficult to do that. So I guess I agree with Jeremy and Teresa. That definitely needs to be changed going forward. That, you know,
Right,
asking
but
people to
currently
pay
they're under
money back
contract,
if something.
To me, you know, my take is, you know, there's something to say about you know, if they're under contract, they're under contract for this season. That's kind of how I see it.
Jeremy, how do the contracts, are they usually written? I mean, are we hiring a basketball coach in July? Or a
Yeah, I mean,
football coach in July? I mean, how did this evolve to where we're paying coaching positions all year long?
yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I don't know. This was the procedure before I came on, that teachers were paid through over their 26 pays, and where that process started and why, I'm not sure. But we know that when they come on board, when we hire, say we just hired a football coach, obviously he's not going to get his payment yet at this time moving forward. So that would begin on the next new contracts when they go out. So if you're not a teacher, you're a lay coach, and you have another job, but you work as an assistant or a head coach in our athletic department, then you'll receive your payment over 2 pay periods during your season. So one towards the beginning of the year when your season starts. So if you're a soccer coach and you work at another job and not part of Manchester Community Schools, you'll receive a pay in August and then another one around October at the end of your soccer season. And then your pay is complete. And that's what I would propose moving forward with all of our coaches, whether they work for Manchester Community Schools or not. That way they get their money during their season. And that way, if something does happen and they're not able to fulfill their coaching assignment, you know, a family emergency or something, they have to resign their position, especially as a teacher now. A lot of times they would have to give us money back because they've been paid over that 26 pay periods. So moving forward, yeah, I would say I want to get away from that and do like 2 payments, one in the early part of their season and one towards the end of their season. How many other sports they coach, we would do that for each particular season that they're involved.
And I would just add that it's typical for a lot of corporations to pay it with their teaching contract. However, they have found situations such as this, and they are all starting to move away from that. So I'm guessing with the turnover of superintendents and that, it just didn't happen yet. So we'll get it straightened out.
So
My
to be
my
clear,
experience would say this is payroll friendly to pay it over the 26 pays, it as opposed to one off. And I can imagine how it got to be how it is. And I think the whole discussion is more complicated than we're going to solve on this call. I trust Jeremy and Teresa and Eric to kind of figure out the best way to do that. It seems simple, but it'll get complicated.
Yeah, it is.
So
So,
can I go ahead, Dave, and then
so can I say that we're talking about this at the correct time, since the contracts are going to end in July? That if you're going to make a change, if the administration's going to recommend a change, you got time to get it done before we sign the new contracts or
Yeah,
approve the new contracts.
yeah.
So Raju, or you basically, your motion was to pay them what they've been paid and kind of cut off at this point? And if we do that, do we know what part of that 45,000 that is, or what?
I don't.
And I hate making decisions, you know. Yeah, go. Sorry, Jeremy, go ahead.
Question for Jeremy. I would assume the majority of that's been paid already, but
Yes, yeah, I would say the majority. I don't want to speculate how much would still be left, but pretty minimal, I would say.
I think there's something to be said for what Mike talked about a little bit earlier. I mean, no one could predict what the circumstances we are. And I know that there's some give and take, so I understand what Raju's saying.
Sure.
But I do feel like we have a contract, and I think we should probably see that contract through like we have with all of our other teachers and all of our other employees. And then I agree with what.
I've got a motion on the floor. If nobody wants to second it, that's fine. I see great uncertainty in the future, so that's the reason I made my motion.
I appreciate that. I understand where you're coming from. But I think what Jeremy and Teresa are talking about will help resolve that issue moving forward.
Yeah, moving forward, it would if we have another coronavirus next year, but I'm
Yeah.
talking about this year.
Right.
No, please not. We don't want that.
well, I think you couple that with the expectation that coaches coach year round and bring a high value outside of actual on field activity and season activity. They're impacting students more broadly than just within their playing season.
Sure.
And I bring a bias to that.
But also certainly
Yeah.
They normally would spend a lot of time in practices and at games that they won't be spending this year.
Well, I know in basketball,
there-
they ran them through the summer, so, you know.
So there is a motion on the table. Is there a second? So I believe what happens is that motion dies, and then we'll open it up for another motion. Is that correct?
Or after the discussion, if he wants to modify it, he can.
Well, there shouldn't be any discussion before a second, but
Typically, there, according to, the rules, there typically isn't. So is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve what's in our board packet.
Okay.
I'll second.
Is there a second? And okay, so there's a motion by Mr. Esposito and a second by Mr. Hensley. Do we have any discussion? All right, then we'll do a roll call for the vote. Mr. Turflinger?
I'm going to abstain.
Okay. Mr. Hensley?
Yes.
Mr. Esposito?
Yes.
Mr. Shaw?
no.
Mr. Bedke?
Yes.
I would also vote yes for approval. So the motion carries 4-1-1. Thank you.
Hey Ruth, can I make a suggestion on the voting procedure?
Sure.
Just, you want to change the order? So Mr. Turflinger doesn't always have to vote first in this case. Can you just
Oh,
roll
sure,
it
I
over?
can. I'm
Just
sorry.
roll it over.
I just don't want to miss anybody. I'm just going in the order on my screen. I'm
Yeah.
sorry,
We're
Mr.
good.
Turflinger.
We're
I
good.
didn't think about it.
Understood.
I'm so nervous about forgetting somebody or what if I'm just sorry. I will do my best to change that.
Well, and more
Um,
importantly, if it comes to the end and it's a tie-breaking vote, then it's not always going to be that same person. But we will
Okay.
be tied tonight, but
I'm looking at the agenda and I think that's all for recommendations. No, sorry. We are looking for recommendation of approval for the 2020-2021 lunch prices.
Yeah, I believe
Is there a motion?
Becky had that in your packet, all the information there.
I make a motion to approve what's in the packet for Becky's lunch prices and
Is there
Second,
a second? Was that you, Mr. Shaw?
second.
Okay. So a motion by Mr. Turflinger and a second by Mr. Shaw. Is there any more discussion? Any discussion?
who does Becky consult with on this?
She has a state director that she goes through, so she's working with IDOE on what she can and cannot do, and they require her to raise it periodically. Typically, it's every year. And so she's has to raise it a minimum of 10 cents.
Okay.
Hey, what's our free and reduced rate right now?
We're right around 50%, depending on what day it is. But yeah, we're right around the 50% mark.
Is there more discussion? All right, then all those in favor, Mr. Esposito.
You're on mute.
Yes.
I was yelling even, you couldn't hear me? Yes.
That's why we don't go to you first.
All right, sorry.
Mr. Bedke,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes,
Mr. Hensley,
Yes.
Mr. Turflinger,
yes.
and I would also vote yes. So the motion carries 6-0. Thank you. All right, so then we have discussion information, policy 4230, student mental and behavior service records. This is a first reading of the policy.
Correct. And this is just, oh, wait a minute, I'm looking at the wrong one. I'm sorry. This policy is put in place just so we know that we need to secure mental health records, but they're not in the traditional file. They're kept by someone that would work with a mental health agency, and they are locked away. We need to make sure that they are contained more as a medical record and not as a student educational file.
Are there any questions or discussion?
Ultimately, the superintendent's in charge of who releases what, but I don't know, it says that my computer moved, sorry. Hang on a second. I just kind of struggle with policies. I like the idea of keeping it separately, but who can access it? Do they have to come and see Randy? Do they have to come and see Teresa? Do they have, is it in a principal's office. Can
Who is
somebody
that?
explain a little more about the security?
Who is they? Who are you asking that can access it?
Access to the records that we're talking about in this policy. I mean, can any teacher go look at those records? Or is it
Well-
just a counselor?
It's typically just the counselor who's in charge of that. That's not something that is supposed to be released to anyone unless there's a medical condition. It's no different than if a child has some sort of a medical condition and they need to have that information. But if it's not pertinent information, it would not be released to any of the teachers.
Thank you.
So yeah, the point of the policy is this is probably some of the most privileged information. I mean, we've got to protect it against release, so.
Sure.
The policy committee is good with this?
Yes.
Yes.
Any other discussion? All right, then there's also a first reading for policy 1000, the Board of Education.
This policy was already a policy. Excuse me. Accepted, had the old mission and vision, so we replaced it with our current one that we've done work on. We did add the board and administrative commitment statements as well. The diversity statement was already part of that policy, and we reviewed it and thought it needed to stay intact as is. Anybody have any questions?
Who reviewed the diversity statement?
As the board or the policy committee be Mr. Hensley, myself, Mr. Bedke, and Mr. Markham. Is there something you're wanting to add or
Well,
change?
Just curious on when you said we reviewed it, I wasn't sure who you were referring to.
Okay,
Well, and there was discussion whether to leave it or not, and then we pretty much, I think we left it alone basically, right?
yes,
If there's some suggestions on it though, it's the first read, so now's the time, if somebody's got suggestions on it, now's the time, so. Or let us know.
yeah, that's what I say. If you think of anything between now and the next board meeting, we can certainly look it over, and we have another meeting coming up that we can review that as well.
Thank you for that committee. You guys are doing a lot of work. Get these up in order. It's appreciated. All right, then we have the first reading of the handbooks, MES, MIS, and Manchester Junior Senior High School. Does anybody want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, were there changes made to those or updates, or is there a red line copy so we can see what was changed?
Well, I noticed that MIS had his highlighted, but the other two did not. So what I can do is have them highlight what those changes are and then resubmit them to you as a board so you can actually see what was changed. If that works for you, I will send it to you.
Yeah, that'd be great. They're just so long that it's kind of hard to
Yeah,
get.
I agree.
Well, and I think these are ones that I'd really like to see public input on, since it's, the handbook, so whether we'll see something out of that or not. I'm hoping that's an easy task for people to to look at these now and give us input, so, or easier maybe.
And typically you get that throughout the school year when things come up, you get input from parents and you make note of it, and typically you can update that down the road. So.
But these changes, nobody's
We
seen.
certainly listen to parents. I'm sorry, what?
The public wouldn't have copies of these proposed ones, right?
No, they could,
Not until now.
I mean, the last year's are always online and they can access those at any time.
I don't know if I froze or if there's just not more discussion. Am I still live?
I'm just perusing through it, sorry.
I think there's lots of frozen people on my screen. I'm not real sure either.
But I think we're at a, Ruth, I think we're at a point where we're gonna see some updated copies from MES and MJ junior, senior high with some, as Raju pointed out, red line.
Yeah, Tommy's was really nice. The way he did that. Okay. So we're okay moving on? Okay, let's go ahead and move on. We are at the end of the meeting. Mr. Self, are there any patron comments?
Let me get back in here. I have not received any emails at this point, and I have not received any phone calls. So now there's going to be, our stream on YouTube is delayed by about 30 seconds. So if we want to wait a couple minutes here. Once again, my email is randy_self@mcs.k12.in.us. Or if you want to give me a phone call, I can give you information. My direct line is 260-306-3360. So I say we wait just a few minutes if there's discussion or whatever you want to go on with. And if I get any emails or anything, I'll pop back on and let you know, and then we'll get those people on if they want to comment.
Excellent. So is it
Hey,
okay to
Rand,
move
I
on to
didn't,
super?
go ahead.
Is that information posted with our meeting notice in the paper?
Yes, it was this time around. We made sure we put an asterisk on it and we had down at the bottom exactly how they could do it. Randy, you can go ahead and talk to them about that if you want.
That's good. I just
Okay.
wanted
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, we posted all this with the agenda. We put it on our social media. We put it on the website. So that was all there at the bottom of the agenda on how they could do that. I did just get a text from Mr. Bisher, the assistant principal at the high school, and he let me know that there were no changes to the junior senior high school handbook, other than obviously yearly editorial changes, changing dates and people's names and different things like that. But there are no policy changes. So he wanted to clarify that.
I can give you a quick update on the roof. As I indicated in the weekly notes, as of last Monday, they had completed about, 9,000 square feet of the roof. Dana was here last Thursday and was up there and walked around and looked around and felt like everything was progressing as it should. They typically have anywhere from 8 to 12 workers working on it pretty much daily when the weather's allowing them to. They've had a few days where they've not been able to do that with the rain. And we know the temps are supposed to get better, but chance of rain every day this next few days. So hopefully they're able to get some more done without getting washed out. So continuing to make progress and haven't found any surprises at this point. They anticipate about 3 weeks to be done. If the weather cooperates, if they had a full 3 weeks of sunny days, they feel they'd be done in 3 weeks for sure.
Well, you know, it's Indiana. The weather always cooperates. So they'll probably be done in 2 weeks.
I
Dr.
didn't-
Grimo, do you have superintendent comments?
I
Oh, I'm sorry,
do.
Mr. Turfling.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to send out an email to the board, but I did talk to Mr. Hobbs. Some of the staff's coming in and out down there periodically, closing down their rooms, getting set up. Like everybody else you talk to, when you ask the questions as far as what's going to happen in the fall, it's the three terrible words, I don't know. He did share some good news that I'd like to share with the board, that the precision ag was approved, and while, you know, our Heartland Career Center is going to set the pattern here. We were hoping to get 8 to 10 kids, you know, the cream of the crop, as we would say, from the FFA. And as it turns out, we have 18 kids. And as I reported last month or the month before, we're bulging at the seams. We got 700 kids that want to go to a building that holds 500 to 600. So I guess I'm smiling. That's a good problem to have. So I guess when the governor decides what we're going to do, we'll all learn together. So it's good news.
I would agree.
Other superintendent comments?
I- Yes, I take this time to thank our students. Because we have 5 more days left of online learning, and just thank them for their patience and how they have stepped it up and tried to do what was necessary to get through. You know, this is new for all of us. We know that, and we understand that some of the frustrations are there, and we're going to work to get better on it. Also want to thank parents, because we know without them at home pushing their children beyond anything that we ever imagined would ever happen. I just want to thank them and acknowledge them for the challenges that they have faced, and just applaud them for their tenacity and perseverance through all of this. It's just been difficult, but our parents have really stepped up and supported our teachers. Also want to just thank my administrative team. They stand behind the scenes, and there's a lot that they do that no one notices, but just supporting our teachers, our technology. They have been there every step of the way. Our teachers have been doing professional development, which has been designed by our administrative staff, food service planning and distribution and communication, and I could go on and on and on. And just really appreciate the supports that have been put in place to assist the parents and staff and students. And I know that they're not done. We have a lot to do this summer. There's going to be a lot on our schedule trying to get ready for next year. And I can't say enough about our administrative team. They're just simply amazing, and appreciate them so much. And I just wanted to make sure that they knew and understood how much we appreciate them for all the efforts that they have done this year. But that's it. That's all I have.
I have
That's
not
yourself?
had any, I've not had any emails or phone calls. So I don't think we have anybody that wants to make any public comments. And I will just double check, make sure nobody was on. I don't think they've made any chats on YouTube. Nope. So no, I think we're good.
Okay, thank you. Board comments?
I'd just like, oh, go ahead, Bryce, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
No, go ahead. That's all right.
I was just going to thank Teresa. I know she's very complimentary of her administration and the teachers. And we also understand that you're behind the scenes. You're at the food lines helping with the food and going into the office every day and pulling your weight. So I want you to know that stuff doesn't go unnoticed. So thank you also.
Thank you.
I have a question for Jeremy or Teresa that I was asked today. Do we have director, officer, insurance? And this might be a question for Mark. Maybe you can't answer it, just follow it up. But someone was telling me today that a lot of boards have director and officer insurance, so that if we get into some kind of a situation, board members can't be sued personally.
Yeah, I don't have the answer to that, but I'll definitely look into that.
Dave, I carry a $2 million liability insurance. That's business and everything, but
Yeah, typically
right.
it is. We just have to
Usually,
check
I
on
think
it.
it would cover, but I'll make sure.
yeah, if you don't think about it. And I just want to say legislatively, I think the biggest thing going on is to see if the stimulus at the state, what they're going to do for states and communities and things like that. And to your point, Raju, there is a lot of uncertainty. And then, I'd like to give some appreciation to teachers, because I think you guys, here there's 8, 9 of us at times on this Zoom. I want you all to think about the teachers trying to do this with 20 kids in a classroom, and I'm trying to keep the size of my classes way down. So I think, there is a lot of uncertainty, not only financially, but the impact of education, what's going to happen with this virus. And so hopefully we're going to have, as we get closer to the start of the school year, there's a plan with some different options depending on this and that, and some if-then statements and things like that somebody's going to put together, so we know with information how to make, what are the best decisions going down. I think a lot of that isn't falling on trees. Dr. Gameau, I think, there's a lot of information that has to come from the state. So, I mean, there is a lot of uncertainty, but at the same point, I'm watching, this, call it what you want, with the stimulus plan, and for us to not pay our coaches that's sort of a travesty to me with what's going on in the country, with tax dollars. So that's just my comment to that whole situation. Yeah, I want to be as frugal as possible as any of you, but at the same time, there's something to me that says when and I think about the farming community out here, those guys, they go on a handshake a lot of times and stuff like this. In this case, we've signed a piece of paper with those guys. So I'm with you though, Raju. There's a lot of uncertainty, and financially, we got a lot of things going against us. I would prod every board member, since we're public, look at that policy list and give us some feedback about what, some priority about what you guys want to see on that. Because I think that's an important function. And I know we still haven't addressed some things we need to address, but we need more information to address that. So that's my comment.
I still have a long list.
I just have one comment I'd share. I think if we've learned anything during this time, before the CV-19, there was maybe a little bit of a push in education, and especially higher education, to go online and do stuff virtually. And I think we've really learned the value of in-person teaching over the last 8 weeks. And I think that will be a strong impact moving forward on a lot of educational institutions. So, and then obviously thank you to you, Teresa, and all you're doing. And Randy behind the scenes, behind the M.
And I just want
Um,
can I just real quick say, because Mike kind of mentioned this a little bit, that we know there's lots of uncertainties out there. We have been preparing all week. We've been meeting, looking at the finances. We're looking at a lot of different unknowns. We did put out a survey to our community, our parents, to see what they were thinking for next year. Although we know that in-house instruction and face-to-face is the best instruction, But we also know there's a lot of people that are uncertain about sending students back to school, especially those that are the most vulnerable population. And so we did send out to kind of get a feel for how many parents are looking at sending kids back to the traditional classroom, how many would prefer an online and maybe a hybrid option where they're participating in clubs or robotics, or maybe they want to come pick up lunch or something. We're just trying to look at all different possibilities. So know that we have another meeting tomorrow to discuss, what the results of that is, and then we're going to go on from there. And we'll keep you updated.
Hey, and just a word of caution on that survey, just so you don't skew your results when, just make sure, like, so I'm senior leaving the school, so I kind of put on there not returning or something like that. So I was kind of thinking about that when I was taking that survey. You can see how important measurement system analysis is with this coronavirus, right? So I was thinking about, on that data, maybe discount the seniors on that.
And
I
we
didn't know if
did.
that
We went in to see how many of them were actually seniors, that the parents would say, hey, my student's not returning, it's a senior. So we've got that information. Thank you.
Perfect.
Was one of the options returning to traditional school?
Correct. Using social distancing and the guidelines from our health department. So
I missed, thank you to Jeremy on earlier. So I wanted, he's my Alice tonight for the Brady Bunch, sitting in the center. So thanks, Jeremy.
A great point. We got whatever possible, this virus goes against everything I teach organizations about distancing and getting teams together and stuff like that. So I don't know. Let's just, or not say pray, but hope, right, that things normalize. So
I see Dr. Lippy sent out a thing about graduation. Are we still working on that?
we have 2 dates set. I want to say they're July 12th and 13th. Am I correct?
No,
18th, 17th and
17th
18th.
and 18th. I'm sorry. You're right. 17th and 18th. And we're looking at options on what we can do at that time. We have a couple different A and B options, and we're just going to wait and see what the governor says, how he guides us to make sure that, that curve is stabilized and we're able to move forward with as much of a traditional graduation as we can. We owe that to our students, and we'd love to be able to give that to them.
Yeah, it's important.
well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time. And I'm gonna go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, Ruth.
Good
Thank
night.
you.